There's a moment in Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning in which he describes the importance of lying convincingly for the sake of one's own life. The particular instance I refer to being that of when a capo of especially bad repute, the murderous capo, would share his poetry. Frankl describes clapping and cheering while desperately trying not to laugh because it was that bad. An exceptional example of a white lie, lies that are deemed largely inconsequential in their misleading nature, for the sake of leading one to a greater end. For, in this example, is not the continuation of one's very life a greater end than the continuation of bad poetry? Who should care whether the capo learns the truth about himself, such a despicable man, as compared to the lives that must become endangered at revealing such a truth? Is not the lie in this example in service of the greater good? I would say so. And thus it seems that there are times in this life in which one should, in fact, lie in service of a greater good. But it is a slippery slope, and pretentious too, for who can truly know the greater good? One only knows one's own selfish desires, and even those aren't so easy to discern. We're not singular of mind in the least. We are conflicted in our interests. And if there is to be any hope in productively navigating one's own conflicted mind, one must not engage in any behavior that might further convolute the mire, by which I mean one must not further distort what might be true by lying to oneself. And that does seem to be what Dostoevsky prioritized in the Brothers Karamazov when he wrote, "Above all, don't lie to yourself. The man who lies to himself and listens to his own lie comes to a point that he cannot distinguish the truth within him or around him." There's an apparent difference to be denoted between lying and lying to oneself, though keeping the two distinct from each other cannot be so simple as we might like to believe. Perhaps because every outward lie takes on a life of its own, a true life, you could say. And so what was patently untrue, something that knew no existence prior, is brought into existence, brought into being. And thus one's life must become, at the very least, more complicated by the falsehood brought into being. Life's already hard enough. How much harder must it become for every falsehood that's added to it? Did Frankl's life become harder for the falsehood he brought into being then? By the lie engaged in and with that then must be maintained? Was that harder than the wrath that may have been incurred by the murderous capo had he responded in earnest? It would seem not, though it is not possible to know. We can only ever surmise what may have proceeded had Frankl not engaged in willful deceit, had he been honest in his response. But we can never actually know. To claim otherwise is to engage in the worst, most damaging of lies, the lying to oneself. And that's exactly what we do every time we claim to know what is true. Truth is not actually available to us in any absolute fixed manner. We can only ever deduce what is more likely to be true by disproving what is false. That's the entire scientific endeavor in a nutshell. Not at all the establishment of truth, rather the incremental elimination of its opposite, and thus a gradual clearing of the waters, but only so far as we abstain from kicking up any more silt from the bottom. The worst of that silt might be that pretentious lie to oneself that one can know. Is there any greater delusion? Any greater delusion than the belief that one knows? To move beyond it must be to recognize our own essential limitation, essential in that being at all, existing, is an exercise in limitation. There is no being without limitation. And the limits that produce being must be the very same that separate us from what is ultimately true. We cannot know the greatest good then. We can only surmise it by moving away from its counter, by moving away from what is clearly false. But this isn't what Frankl did in this particular instance. And I've found no other more inspiring life to draw from. Might we say then that there must be a time and a place for everything, even for lying? That there are, in fact, times when what is untrue becomes most true in the superlative sense. Isn't that exactly what good fiction demonstrates at its best? An untrue story that reveals what is most true, or at least what is more true. Factual accounts are only true to their moment, whereas fictional accounts can draw from myriad such moments to reveal what is more true, meta-truths, profound truths. And the opposite of a profound truth is often another profound truth. Remember Niels Bohr? It is a truly slippery slope. It may be true that there is a time and a place for everything, including lying. But what must be even more true is that I would be deluded to believe that I can know that moment. And to whatever degree I presume the opposite, the more muddied my waters must become. The man who listens to his own lie comes to a point that he cannot distinguish the truth within him or around him.